I've got highlights of yesterday's final hearing down in Caseyville, where residents of Illinois asked questions about the state's gun ban registry, and a lot of good important questions. And we even are hearing from some of the former state lawmakers who are saying that JCAR, which meets today, needs to suspend these rules. So where are we at in this process? We, of course, January 10th, you had the governor enact the Protect Illinois Communities Act, which banned the sale and possession of certain semi-automatic firearms, rifles like AR-15s, AK-47s, certain types of shotguns, certain types of handguns, and even magazines with more than 10 rounds for rifles and more than 15 rounds for handguns. And there's a registration component. That registration component opened up on October 1st, and we've seen now 5 weeks in, and the total number of registrations, and if you go to the Illinois State Police website, you can see this yourself. They just updated that last night, and you've got around 2,900 or so that have registered their firearms, and you can pull this up yourself, take a look at it, and you'll see that indeed the registration totals 2,906. And that's only of around 2.4 million people. That's only around 1.2%. Let me rephrase that. That's only 0.12%. So 2,900 individuals filing out of 2.4 million firearm owner identification card holders. Of that, only 2,900 have submitted disclosures that they have a banned firearm. That comes out to 0.12% of total firearm owner identification card holders. So interesting to see those stats. Now, 5 weeks in, January 1st is the deadline to register, but there's a lot of questions about the registration. Maybe all these questions are why we have the low registration rates. Maybe also the reason why we have a low registration rate is that you'll hear people are not wanting to comply with this. So let's go ahead and get to those highlights of yesterday's meeting, the final meeting of the Illinois State Police in their taking of public comments for the gun registration. It was at the Caseyville Village Hall, and you had around 150 people there, almost packed, but no PA system, which was fascinating. Here is some of the public comments that were read from Moms Demand Action.
We appreciate the work of the Illinois General Assembly and the governor in enacting the Protect Illinois Community Act, especially in light of the recent mass shooting in Maine and last year's shooting in Highland Park. Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. We work to pass stronger gun laws and to close the loopholes that jeopardize the safety of our families. The Metro East group of the Illinois Moms Demand chapter encompasses East St. Louis and areas to the northeast in the metro area.
How will this law be enforced? Law enforcement agencies, including the ISP, are charged with enforcing the Protect Illinois Communities Act throughout the state. ISP will continue to enforce the FOID Act and Article 24 of the Criminal Code of 2012 by partnering with local law enforcement through our Violent Crimes Intelligence Task Force. The task force is a collaborative effort to reduce and prevent illegal possession and use of firearms, firearm-related homicides, and other violent crimes.
So at the public hearing, they read comments that had been submitted up to that point, and you can still submit public comments. You just got to find the right email address at the Illinois State Police website and then send in your public comments. Those will be essentially taken in and addressed at some point. Whether you are sent a direct response via email or not, not too sure how that's going to work, but you have until November 20th to submit written comments on the emergency rules that Illinois State Police filed. Reminder, Illinois State Police filed these rules late September for the registry that opens October 1st. The Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, a bipartisan legislative panel of 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, 3 from each chamber in each caucus. They oversee these rules, and they could vote to suspend these rules. Last month, they didn't do that. They tried objecting to the rules, which could help in court cases, but they instead just decided to approve a motion recommending these 3 public hearings. We had one in Springfield on Thursday, we had one in Chicago on Friday, and then you had the public comments that were made down in Southern Illinois in Caseyville in the Metro East area. Here is Ed Sullivan. He was among those providing public comments yesterday in Caseyville.
A security personnel armed with an FCC, firearms control card, they own their firearms. It's no different than a plumber or a mechanic, that their firearm is their tool in what they do. So the question I have is, if they're off duty but still in possession of the firearms, are they in violation? So their employer does not present them with the firearm. It's theirs. And so that's the first question. Second question, are they in violation if they use these firearms to train? So obviously, if you are an employee that your livelihood depends on you being able to operate a firearm properly and under the right circumstances, you should be training weekly. And so if they haven't filed an affidavit, are they in violation? So those are the two questions as it relates to private security personnel. Sure.
As our rules are drafted today, yes, they would be in violation. If they own the firearm and they have not filed an endorsement affidavit, they would be in violation as of January 1st, 2024. However, we understand that this is a concern that has been raised regarding that interpretation, and we will be working with JCAR to further clarify the rule to the extent it is within our statutory authority to do so. At this point, we do not have proposed language that would address that concern.
So if someone in the industry proposed language and to try and help you along, would that be possible?
Absolutely. The public is welcome to submit suggestions with respect to our rules during the public comment process. There is a public comment portal, and you are free to submit questions, proposed language, anything like that that you think would help with this process.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I don't know why anybody would comply with this act. I have no idea. Why would you ever register a firearm with government? But there will be people that will, and that's fine. I respect that. But these rules have to be clear enough so people don't become criminals by no fault of their own. So I thank you for your time.
We did make a note of the final example that you gave us, and we will endeavor to address that issue. We understand the concern, and we appreciate your time today.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to make sure you kind of get a little bit of behind the scenes, because while, yes, you could hear the questions from Ed Sullivan from the State Rifle Association and the response from Suzanne Bond, who's with Illinois State Police, that was because I had a separate microphone in front of Ed Sullivan, and I had a separate microphone in front of Suzanne Bond. The video, of course, I'm putting those two audios together so you can actually hear them instead of just cavernous audio, right? But people at the actual event could not hear, and that was made clear after Sullivan and his testimony and the questions that he asked.
Can the people in the back of the room hear at all? No. Okay, we will do better to project. If you are having a hard time hearing, if you will raise your hand, that will alert me to the fact that you're still having a hard time hearing.
There are microphones and speakers in this building. Don't get a bullhorn out of the police car.
It should be very evident.
You could hear Thomas Mag there saying there are microphones and speakers in this building, and there were speakers around. I'm not sure why they didn't anticipate not having this and bringing with them some of the speaker equipment. Even just a little Bose system would have probably been sufficient, or a karaoke machine, right? With a little speaker probably would have been sufficient, but we didn't have that at yesterday's hearing. And again, the only reason why I think you're able to hear clearly, at least for the most part, with this presentation, these highlights, is because I had two different microphones going. But anyways, we'll continue. Illinois gun rights expert who's been fighting in this space for a long time, Valinda Rowe. She helps manage the website IllinoisCarry.com. She was integral in highlighting the various problems there were with the lack of concealed carry in Illinois. She helped foster that and get those through whenever the state was forced by the courts to allow for some kind of carry law in Illinois. If you want a reference point for that, go search my channel for Gun Free Zone, the movie. It's a documentary I put together back in 2012 about Illinois getting the right to keep and bear arms. So go check that out, Gun Free Zone, the movie. But Valinda Rowe was there yesterday as well, and she raised substantial questions and got some responses from ISP.
It should be very evident that from those who have spoken that the information on the ISP website is not clear enough. And that even though you have answers on the frequently asked questions, I would strongly urge you to review those and make sure they're in plain English, common use language that we can all understand. It's very important when we're facing felony charges that we know in black and white without question what the situation is. And we need correct information. In regards to incomplete lists, incomplete answers, incomplete flowcharts, incomplete photos, we're all still up in the air about what is legal and what is not. And we just encourage you to update those. In regards to the new updates and changes that you do make, we would ask that there be an indication or an index of those changes and the date that they were made, so that we know that when we go to review the page that we are up to date with the information there. Currently, we just have to comb through the questions and answers and see if any of the language has been changed. And with a huge volume of information, that's very difficult to know if we have the most current information.
We will make a note of that.
Thank you.
So obviously, the question about changing frequently asked questions and the just volume of questions that are on the state police website and how those are being handled. These clearly are some questions that persist. More from Valinda Rowe yesterday.
Even active law enforcement today might not always be active law enforcement, and they may not retire. They may leave service in between there. The window will have passed to register. What will happen to those individuals?
I believe the FAQ you're referring to encourages them to do so while they are still employed. However, the Illinois State Police is not going to shut its endorsement affidavit portal down. Nobody will be prohibited from submitting an endorsement affidavit even after the January 1st deadline passes.
It's a really interesting question and answer there, that they're not going to be shutting down the registration portal for those who may be law enforcement now, but after January 1st, maybe they find a new career. What are they going to be? How are they going to be treated on this? You can see where the pitfalls are falling in all of this, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment being a civil liberty, a constitutional right, the argument that semi-automatic firearms like an AR-15 are commonly owned firearms by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes of self-defense, and even a judge in California saying that a firearm underneath the bed is still being used for self-defense even in the quiet of night. So clearly there are significant questions still at play here. Even though Friday you had the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals vacate a lower court ruling, we'll take a look at some of the status here of firearms lawsuits, but you still have lawsuits pending. In the Southern District of Illinois, you've got Thomas Magg's lawsuit that's still pending. You've got federal firearms licensees of Illinois that are set to file a preliminary injunction motion to halt the registration deadline. So you still have lawsuits very much alive in all of this. But the registration deadline of January 1st persists. Here's more from Valinda Rowe, asking questions about language and how important language is when it comes to people possibly facing felonies.
And the answer, a 15-round magazine without an extension kit is legal. However, ISP's own answer cites the language of can be readily restored or converted. Despite ISP recognizing that language, it ignores this in its answer. How does ISP justify ignoring the plain language of the law when these magazines are in fact readily convertible by simply removing the base plate and adding an extension?
And the Illinois State Police is aware that the public has asked us to help define readily converted, readily modified, and we will be working with JCAR in the coming weeks in an effort to do so.
Thank you. Question number 3. It's somewhat in tongue-in-cheek, but also seriously. Todd Vandermeide last Friday talked about his Star Wars lightsaber and whether the parts used on it would have to be registered. And that kind of raised a question among our members then about airsoft that uses some of those same parts. FOID cards are not required to possess airsoft items. Children own a lot of these. People who do not have FOID cards own these. And so the question is, how will this work for those individuals? They don't have a FOID card to register under.
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in two parts. You do not have to have a FOID card to register any item, but specifically an assault weapon attachment. Additionally, the Illinois State Police is aware of this concern regarding parts designed for airsoft and whether they are subject to the endorsement affidavit provisions, and we will be working to get guidance out to the public on that. We're in the midst of these hearings, so we simply haven't had an opportunity to address that issue and get an answer to the public, but we will be doing so in the coming weeks.
Did she just say that you don't have to have a FOID card to register? Because, I mean, just looking at the tutorial that Illinois State Police said, it was all based off of a FOID card. You're going through like the FOID card system. Let me hear that again, just to make sure that we're clear here.
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in two parts. You do not have to have a FOID card to register any item, but specifically an assault weapon attachment. Additionally, the Illinois State Police is aware of this concern regarding parts designed for airsoft and whether they are subject to the endorsement affidavit provisions, and we will be working to get guidance out to the public on that. We're in the midst of these hearings, so we simply haven't had an opportunity to address that issue and get an answer to the public, but we will be doing so in the coming weeks.
We've got less than 2 months here before people could face felony or charges, misdemeanor charges or felony charges. We're in the midst of this. We've got less than 2 months before that deadline, and felony charges are not something that you sneeze around with here. More from Valinda Rowe with a statement in particular. They got a reaction from the audience.
The oath of office for sworn ISP personnel requires giving thoughtful, intelligent obedience to orders juxtaposed against upholding the four intersecting pillars of the U.S. and Illinois Constitution and U.S. and Illinois law. In light of the recent New York brewing decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which clearly opposes this law and these rules being discussed today, our officers did not sign on to enforce such an obviously unconstitutional law. Most of our officers will be forced to violate all they know to be true about the Constitution and Second Amendment or risk losing their jobs. They are being trapped into enforcing a law on a citizenry who is also trapped by the confines of living in this state. It is a sad day, and they have tough decisions to make. And although we are here today in an attempt to clarify and define the rules, we all know that citizens of Illinois are going to wholesale ignore all of this. Many local law enforcement agencies will not enforce it. Huge numbers of states' attorneys have already said they will not prosecute it. These hearings really are just a pretense that this law will survive constitutional scrutiny, and what's worse, further pretense that this will bring any change in regards to protecting our communities and making them safer as a result of this law and these rules. Instead, we all know we should be looking at mental health issues and violent criminal issues, if not more so. Those issues are more prevalent than the weapons that are used in these atrocities. Time and time again, the signs of mental illness are there, especially in like the 4th of July killing that's being mentioned quite often during these hearings. I encourage you and Director Brendan Kelly to urge current administration to find ways to protect its citizens from those who are mentally dangerous and put our efforts there instead of creating ineffective laws and rules that put our law enforcement at risk of violating the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens and do nothing to make us safer. So
So clearly, despite not having a PA system, Valinda Rowe's message got across to the room there, as you could hear them going into applause after she made her final comments there. Wasn't the only one, of course, that got a lot of attention when it comes to making public comments and getting questions, specific questions. Dan Eldridge from Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, also Max and Shooter Sports in Des Plaines. He was there to really get to some of the meat of the questions that at least Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois have. These are licensed gun stores. And he goes with a question really about the frequently asked questions website on the state police online website.
First, the FAQs, are they static? Will they be changed or added to?
They will be added to.
Without any sort of change log, how can people rely on those to make consequential decisions?
We have heard the request for a change log, and we will work to see how we can address that.
So they had even more questions that were being asked of Illinois State Police. Dan Eldridge driving a lot of those questions, and in particular making sure that it was clear as to what some of the regulations are going to be for transferring things.
Repairs that must go back to the manufacturer require us to log it in, send it to the manufacturer, they log it in, we get it back. Again, we cannot transfer these firearms back to customers that own them, perhaps lawfully and registered and all of that. We can't transfer them back. So these firearms are not repairable. I would suggest that you correct FAQ 6 to make this point very clear to people before they get caught up in a trick bag here. FAQ number 9, small comment, but I think it's significant. You misspelled brake in muzzle brake. This is a document that people are supposed to rely on for guidance in very, very consequential decisions. It really should be corrected. FAQ number 25, assault weapons owned by individuals, even if the person owns a business or is licensed as an FFL, are subject to the endorsement affidavit. Could you elaborate on that? Does that include shop inventory, rental guns, owned by the corporation that holds the FFL, or owned by a sole proprietorship? What do you mean by that? There's a great deal of confusion among our members on that front.
Okay, we will endeavor to make that clear. Thank you.
So, again, the questions about transferring and people who have firearms worked on by an FFL. If the FFL is unable to actually
inventory as of,
have inventory, how are they supposed to be able to get a customer the firearms that they feel that they have a right to fix and to return? Here is more from yesterday.
Yes, an FFL can maintain their inventory as of January 10, 2023, and I'm skipping forward here. An FFL cannot purchase additional assault weapons to maintain an inventory. However, an FFL can obtain additional assault weapons on behalf of persons exempt from the purchase provisions of PICA. Please refer to blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is very, very misleading because within PICA, if you do go to 24 1.9 and 1.10 and read through, interstate commerce is not impacted here. There is no prohibition for an FFL, be it a distributor, a manufacturer, or a retailer, to purchase banned items for resale out of state. Yet this is suggesting that it is.
We will take your concern under advisement and work to correct that.
So again, the state police providing some response saying, we hear what you're saying. We get that there's some uncertainty here. We'll do what we can to correct it. More from Dan Eldridge.
A person authorized in this section to possess such items only at, quote, a properly licensed firing range or sport shooting competition. Many of our members own ranges open to the public, but to the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing in Illinois as a licensed firing range. This is clearly a cut and paste from somebody else's assault weapon ban. Please clarify, will the department view it as a violation for customers to lawfully use their legally possessed firearms at our non-licensed range?
Sir, I'm going to have to do some research on that.
It's in the law. People have been raising this question for months publicly, but yet they need to do more research on this. Rather fascinating. I mean, this was a question that was raised even when the law was being brought forward and debated. More from Dan Eldridge.
Each weapon or attachment is a violation. So, one rifle with 2 features or attachments is how many offenses? Is it one offense for the rifle with all the stuff on it? Or is it a point system where you're violated for the rifle, for the parts, for all of that.
That will not be a decision for the Illinois State Police. That will be a decision for the state's attorneys throughout the state of Illinois.
Last.
All right, so there you go. You got Eldridge asking some really important questions to get clarity on all of this. But are they getting response that they're hoping for, especially, again, with less than 2 months before you've got the firearms registry? It is Bishop on Air. If you're liking what you're hearing, I do this each and every morning. Be sure to like, subscribe, click that notification bell. Follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. Just search Bishop on Air across all platforms, and you'll be able to find me, and we can connect that way. You can also email me, bishoponair@gmail.com. We've got a lot more to get to, but here's more from final comments of Dan Eldridge, federal firearms licensees of Illinois in Caseyville yesterday for the final public hearing with Illinois State Police on the gun ban registry rules.
The Department of State Police had 9 months to produce rules that would clarify poorly or undefined terms and describe how this registry would be implemented. You chose to do so on an emergency basis at the 11th hour rather than the normal, orderly notice and public comment process. That process requires, I believe, 2 45-day comment periods, which, if you had published these rules in May, 5 months after the act had passed, would have been sufficient. So here we are with emergency rules that will be in effect for 150 days, well past the closing of the registration window. The rules you published largely restate the act without clarifying much of anything. Why did the department choose to enact these rules on an emergency basis at the last possible moment?
We can't even hardly hear you.
That's right.
Stand up.
The Illinois State Police worked with the Attorney General's Office, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and JCAR staff to draft these rules and publish them as quickly as possible.
Is that an answer to why? I mean, they just said, again, from yesterday's public hearing in Caseyville, much more, focus there from the gun rights groups and the gun owners in Southern Illinois than we saw in Chicago and even in Springfield. Springfield, there were maybe 60 people. Chicago, the room looked practically empty. Down in Caseyville, 150 plus people. Springfield, some audio problems, but the record was still made. Chicago, great audio. Down in Caseyville, they didn't even have a public address system. None of the hearings featured Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly, and that's a point that former State Senator Darren Bailey made, former gubernatorial candidate for Republicans Darren Bailey made when he made his public comments yesterday.
I have utmost respect for the Illinois State Police, and I am so sorry for this tough situation that you are in. I am curious of one thing, probably the only question I have. This is home territory to Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly. Is there a reason why he is not here today to face his friends and neighbors?
Thank you. Howard.
Director Kelly is otherwise occupied within the state, and he sent me as his representative.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You can tell our governor, who is comfortably residing in his gated mansion with private security, that if he wants our firearms, he is going to have to pry them from my cold, dead hands. This is America. Our founding fathers understood the importance of an armed citizenry as a safeguard against tyranny. We will uphold that legacy with unwavering determination. Thank you.
So again, Darren Bailey, former gubernatorial candidate, former state senator. He's now running to be a member of the U.S. House. So clearly there were a lot of impassioned people there at the public hearing. And I think that the questions are going to persist, and whether or not state police actually get to answering those questions, we shall see. But stay tuned. All right, I got a lot more to get to, including some of the Q&A after the meeting with Ed Sullivan from the State Rifle Association, with Terry Bryant, a state senator who was in attendance but didn't make public comments, but also we had a moment with former state senator Darren Bailey. So that's coming up next here. It's Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out with me. It is time for just a short breather. All right, I promise we'll be back.